All right, so I believe we can get started now. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Shadid. I work as a policy analyst on the Transport Canada RPAS task force. And on behalf of the task force, I'd like to welcome you to Transport Canada's consultation on the topic of the proposed fees for lower risk beyond visual line of sight RPAS operations. The goal of today's meeting is to provide an overview of fees for services that Transport Canada intends to introduce as part of an upcoming regulatory package for lower risk BVLOS operations, and answer any questions that you might have on those proposed fees. So some quick housekeeping items before we get started. Please make sure to mute your microphones while others are speaking. We also ask that you keep your questions until the questions and answers portion of this session. If you prefer, you can also write your questions in the chat function and we'll address them during the Q&A session. Today's session is taking place in English. However, participants are invited to speak in the official language of their choice. The deck slides for the upcoming presentation are bilingual for your convenience. La présentation et les discours auront lieu en anglais. Cependant, les invités peuvent participer dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Les diapos pour la présentation sont bilingues pour rendre les choses plus faciles à suivre. A quick overview of the agenda for today's meeting. Jeannie Stewart-Smith, manager of the policy team on the RPAS task force, will provide the opening remarks. We'll then do a quick roundtable introduction for everyone on the call. I'll then give a presentation that summarizes the fee proposal, and then we'll move on to the Q&A portion of the session before finishing off with closing remarks. So at this time, I'll pass the mic over to Jeannie for opening remarks.
Thanks very much, Alex. Can I just get a quick audio check? I was having issues before.
Yep, loud and clear.
Fantastic. When in doubt, turn it off and turn it back on again. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I will keep it short so that we can get to the meat of this afternoon's discussion. But as Alex noted, we've released a fee proposal for consultation, and we are holding these sessions in order to answer any questions, clarifying questions you might have about the proposal.
Sean Devery with Iris Automation.
To help you in
is now joining.
Written submission. And just a quick reminder, everyone, if you can keep yourselves on mute, that avoids echoes and other issues, and we'll keep the meeting running more smoothly. So we will, in the interest of time, we've got a good crowd on the call this afternoon. So in the interest of time, Alex, I'll ask that we do introductions for the TC team before we kick off the presentation. And then when we get to the Q&A, if you do have a question, as Alex mentioned, you can either put it in the chat or feel free to raise your hand. But I'd ask that you just do a quick intro to who you are, where you're coming from, before we get into your questions. So with that, back over to you, Alex, for the TC introductions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeannie. All right, starting off with Frank.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Frank Brasbahati. I'm with the RPAS Task Force. My specialty is licensing and training, and I look after all the schools, the flight reviewers, and the exams for RPAS. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Tom?
Greetings, my name is Tom Hasty. I'm an engineer on the task force, and on this round of regulations, I'm focusing on the technical requirements and standards that drones doing BVLOS operations will have to meet.
Thanks, Tom. Veronica?
Hi, everyone. My name is Veronica Newbury. I'm a research and analysis officer with the RPAS Task Force. Very happy to be meeting with you all today.
Great. And Tyson?
Hey everybody, Tyson Morrow. I work in TC's corporate cost recovery group. So we assist multiple modes within TC with their fee proposal development and regulatory development. Happy to contribute today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyson. So we'll move on to the presentation now. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yeah, it's up.
Perfect, thanks. So the purpose of today's presentation is really to provide an overview of the proposed fees, fee design, and service standards for services under consideration in support of the lower risk BVLOS regulations, and also to answer the RPAS community's clarifying questions on these issues. So in terms of the lower risk BVLOS regulatory work to date, since 2017, we've been doing a lot of research and development work on operational limits of drones and also the operational limits of the drones themselves, not just the operations. And essentially, we've been doing that in an effort to inform the regulatory development process. From 2017 to 2019, we conducted short-range BVLOS industry trials. Here, these trials took place with key industry players in select applications. And we did that to collect data on short-range BVLOS operations to inform our regulatory development process. In 2019, Transport Canada conducted a department-wide regulatory review to identify areas where regulations could be introduced in order to help
Sean Devery with Iris Automation
is now exiting.
Sorry about that. And then sort of regulatory review to see areas where we can introduce regulations that would help the transport industry grow. And that regulatory review really reconfirmed our perspective on the drone industry and what we've been hearing from drone operators, that there was definitely a need for BVLOS regulations. In 2019, we began authorizing more lower risk BVLOS operations via the SFOC process. So we were starting expanding the group of operators that received SFOCs for BVLOS operations.
Is now joining.
Beyond those from the short range BVLOS trials. And in spring 2020, we published the Notice of Proposed Amendment outlining TC's intent to publish lower risk BVLOS regulations, of which this fee proposal consultation is part of this. It's part of the same regulatory development process. And the comments received from stakeholders in both response to the NPA and in response to the current fee proposal consultation that we're doing will inform the draft regulations, which are scheduled for pre-publication in Canada Gazette 1 in fall 2021. So in terms of the scope of the proposed regulations, it really breaks down into three categories. First is expanded BVLOS, so allowing heavier RPAS, weighing between 25 kilograms and 150 kilograms, to operate VLOS in controlled and uncontrolled airspace. This is really seen as a expansion of the VLOS regulations that were published in 2019 under Part 9 of the Canadian Aviation Regulations. Next is lower risk BVLOS, so creating a framework to allow for BVLOS operations in sparsely populated areas in uncontrolled airspace. Here, we'd be allowing RPAS operations with drones weighing between 250 grams and 150 kilograms. And it would depend, the size of the drone that could be used would be depending on the population density of the area in which you want to operate the drone. And lastly, there's the concept known as localized BVLOS. So it would be making it easier to conduct short range BVLOS operations under strict safety conditions. And this would be done using the Advanced Pilot Certificate, which was introduced in the 2019 VLOS regulations. So when we talk about our regulatory approach, really the objective of the approach is to promote innovation and economic opportunity by providing regulatory predictability to help the industry grow. And that approach really has several pillars, one of which is ensuring that pilots are properly trained and qualified. We do this by introducing knowledge requirements that pilots must have in order to obtain different pilot certificates, ensuring that RPAS are designed to safely conduct operations by setting manufacturer requirements that must be met in order for an RPAS to be used in a specific category of operation, developing flight procedures which support safe airspace integration, so really the rules that pilots must follow in order to avoid posing a risk to other aircraft and people on the ground, and promoting accountability and safety practices for organizations flying RPAS. So in terms of the fee design, there are a number of factors that we kept in mind or that influenced the prices of the fees that we ended up settling on. The first is the degree to which the service provides a public or private benefit. Fees for similar services charged in other jurisdictions, so looking at like-minded states such as the United States to see what they're charging for low-risk BVLOS services. The stakeholders' economic context, in particular the COVID-19 pandemic's effect on the RPAS industry and its ability to absorb costs moving forward. Other costs that operators must incur due to the regulations. So, for example, as part of the proposed regulations, we'd be introducing a mandatory requirement to attend flight school in order to obtain the new pilot certificate. So, keeping those non-TC related, non-TC managed costs in mind when setting TC prices to evaluate the overall effect that it might have on the industry, and also the level of effort and cost of delivering the service for TC. And this is new for this proposed regulatory package. All existing and proposed fees will adjust annually for inflation. So this currently is not the case under the 2019 BVLOS regulations, but once these regulations come into effect, when they're published in Canada Gazette 2, this will come into effect and they'll adjust annually for inflation according to the Consumer Price Index. So in terms of the activities and fees introduced to support regulations, the first is drone registration. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this service. To support the proposed regulations, we'd be expanding it to require that all drones that weigh between 25 kilograms and 150 kilograms will need to be registered. And this is regardless of whether or not they're being operated for low-risk BVLOS operations or expanded BVLOS operations. This will be administered via the drone management portal, which is kind of Transport Canada's one-stop shop for all online services that drone users must use in order to comply with the regulations. And the proposed fee is $10 to register all drones weighing between 250 grams and 150 kilograms, which represents an increase from the current price of $5 for the 250 gram to 25 kilogram drone category. And the increased fee more accurately reflects the cost of delivering the service for TC. Next, another service is taking a knowledge exam for the new PAL certificate for low-risk BVLOS operations. This is one of the prerequisites that one would need to complete in order to obtain the new PAL certificate for low-risk BVLOS operations that we're introducing. This would be administered via the DMP, and the proposed fee is $50, and exam results do not expire. The next service is obtaining a new pilot certificate for low-risk BVLOS operations. So once you've met all the preconditions, this is the process of actually going online and applying for that pilot certificate and receiving it. Similar to the advanced pilot certificate, this would be administered via the DMP, and the proposed fee is $125. Pilot certificates do not expire. However, pilots will be required to meet a recency requirement similar to the one for advanced pilot certificate. The next service is that we'd be extending the privileges of the advanced pilot certificate. This would be to permit localized BVLOS operations and also certain VLOS expansion operations. So when we say that, we're referring to drones that weigh between 25 kilograms and 150 kilograms that are operated in uncontrolled airspace away from people. And an important point to mention here is that this would apply to anyone that holds an advanced pilot certificate. If you already hold an advanced pilot certificate, you'll be able to conduct these operations under the proposed regulations. You might have to meet one or two additional kind of regulations that we might we're considering, but overall it will be a seamless transition for anyone that holds an advanced pilot certificate to conduct those operations. And the fees for the knowledge exam and for issuing the advanced pilot certificate will not change relative to current prices. Next is obtaining an RPAS operator certificate, or an ROC. This is a scalable framework to promote organizational safety, and it covers certain criteria such as, establishing an accountable executive, a person responsible for RPAS maintenance, etc. And one important thing to keep in mind here is that this applies to anyone that is looking to conduct low-risk BVLOS operations. That applies equally to organizations as well as individuals who want to conduct low-risk BVLOS operations. Those who want to conduct the VLOS expansion category do not need to obtain an ROC. The proposed fee is $250. It doesn't expire, and there's no additional fee for updating declared information to TC related to the ROC. So, for example, we're considering having our ROC holders have to declare who their accountable executive may be to TC If you want to go online and change that information, you won't have to pay an additional fee for that. Then there's the Declaration Plus process. So the Declaration Plus process is the newer version of the declaration process, which many people might be familiar with. And it's the process through which that RPAS manufacturers and service providers can declare to TC that their machine essentially is compliant with the manufacturer requirements that we put in place for the new categories, so some of the new categories of low risk BVLOS operations and BVLOS expansion operations. The big difference between Declaration Plus and the declaration process is A, expanded manufacturer requirements, and B, the fact that all compliance plans would be reviewed by TC engineers under the Declaration Plus process. And the proposed fee for that service is $1,200. We'd also be introducing 2 new categories of SFOC based on operational complexity. The proposed fee would be $150 for low complexity SFOCs, and some of the operations that would require you to obtain a low complexity SFOC include operations at advertised events, and $2,000 for high complexity SFOC, and some of the operations that would require you to obtain a high complexity SFOC would include operations with a drone that weighs over 150 kilograms. And an SFOC would no longer be needed for some VLOS and BVLOS operations. So part of the reason why we're introducing this regulatory package is to make it much easier for RPAS operators to conduct lower risk BVLOS and VLOS expansion operations without having to obtain an SFOC for those operations. So by having an ROC and a pilot certificate, you'd be able to conduct lower risk BVLOS operations and VLOS operations with the drone that weighs between 25 kilograms and 150 kilograms without having to obtain an SFOC. There's also, we're going to be a service that we're introducing is to reissue an SFOC with a minor amendment. So this minor amendment could include something like updating the location of an operation, and this can be carried out without paying the full price of an SFOC. Oftentimes we have operators who, are conducting basically the exact same operation, but they're just changing the location. And given that they already have a template of an SFOC in place, and it doesn't take too much work for Transport Canada to reissue an SFOC just with a changed date or changed location, we are introducing that option of only having to pay $60 for all SFOC types, as this better reflects the amount of work that Transport Canada puts into it. And one quick note for the SFOC categories here, public safety agencies conducting certain types of operations, such as search and rescue, would be exempt from having to pay for these SFOC fees. So in terms of our service standards, the service standards on this slide here refer to all services that are automated via the drone management portal online. So the service standards here, when you're going online to register a drone, you can expect your drone registration to be issued to you immediately. However, in the off case where something goes wrong, there's a tech glitch or something like that, and it requires TC intervention on our part to get you that drone registration, the service standard can be seen as 10 working days. But again, those are for very, very rare cases. For most of the services listed here on this page, you can expect to receive that service immediately, given that it's an online service. So to obtain a certificate of drone registration, 10 working days, conduct an exam for a pilot certificate for low risk BVLOS operations, 10 working days, obtain a pilot certificate for low risk BVLOS operations, 10 working days, and obtaining an ROC, 10 working days. So the service standards that are listed on this page refer to services that require a little bit more manual intervention on the part of either a TC engineer or a TC inspector to evaluate a plan that was submitted to Transport Canada or documents that were submitted to Transport Canada. So the service standard for obtaining a reissued SFOC with a minor amendment is 30 working days. Obtaining an SFOC low complexity is 30 working days. Obtaining an SFOC high complexity is 60 working days. And obtaining confirmation of a Declaration Plus, that would be 60 working days. So in terms of our next steps, Over summer 2021, we're going to be considering stakeholder feedback that we received in response to the fee proposal. We'll later be drafting and publishing a what we heard report, which summarizes the main themes that we heard from stakeholders during the consultations. And we'll be sharing that with stakeholders once it's ready. Over the summer, we're going to start drafting the regulations, and we're targeting a pre-publication of the regulations in Canada Gazette 1 in fall 2021. And similar to the MPA, at that point, post publication in Canada Gazette 1, you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback on the entirety of the regulatory package. The consultations that we're really holding now are really with regards to the fees themselves, the service standards, and we really want to know, how those fees and service standards are having an effect on you as an RPAS operator or on your stakeholders. So that's really kind of like the targeted area of which we're seeking feedback on. However, you'll have an opportunity to provide feedback on the wider regulatory package at Canada Gazette 1. So how to submit your feedback? We kindly ask that you email your feedback on the fee proposal to the email address listed there, no later than June 20th, 2021. That email address is the same one that we've been using to communicate with you for these fee proposal consultations. So no need to write it down. I recognize that it's pretty long or take any screenshots. You can just simply use the same email address that we've been using to communicate with you for these for this fee proposal consultation. And one thing that we ask is that even though today we're going to be having a discussion about the fees and their appropriateness and answering any questions that you might have on them, we kindly ask that you submit your feedback in writing to this email address here. That way we can properly triage it and evaluate it for our What We Heard report and take it into consideration in the lead up to the drafting of the regulations. So thanks for that. That rounds up the presentation. Now we'll begin the questions and answers portion of the presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please do so using the raised hand function in MS Teams. And as Jeanine mentioned, please make sure to provide your name and, if appropriate, the organization you're representing before you ask your question. It's completely up to you whether or not you want to open your camera, and just don't forget to mute your microphone and lower your hand after asking your question. So now I'll hand it over to Jeannie to kick off the Q&A session.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, we'll turn to Q&As now, and we will just ask that we focus first on the clarification questions, and then if there are additional questions, we can come back to those perhaps at the end of the session. Really, the goal of today is to help you inform your written submission to us, and this is a really important next step in the regulatory development process, as Alex noted. This follows on the 2020 Notice of Proposed Amendment, where we outlined a framework for lower risk beyond visual line of sight regulations and a larger scale visual line of sight operations. We've put forward for consideration a series of fees and service standards that we're now seeking your comments on. So with that, I will turn it over. I think I saw Don's hand go up first. So over to you, Don. Welcome to the session.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Joyce from DonDronesOn. I have submitted my feedback to the fee proposal already. So I hope you've seen that and looked at it. And you've already answered one of the questions already, which was the grandfathering of the localized BVLOS. Does it apply to advanced guys? So yeah, that's good. So thank you. My other question is around the SFOCs, the minor SFOCs specifically. There's two on my list that are on yours that I think should just be part of the normal process, which is flying above normal ceiling and flying near a military aerodrome. Is there and then there's pilots who are not Canadian, so foreign pilot applications. Those, well, the DND one isn't even on your list, which was kind of weird, but those three in particular, to me, sound like they should just be part of a normal process, either normal exams for foreign pilots or the normal NAV Canada request process for the flying above 400 or in the vicinity of a D&D. Is there a reason those have not been moved into the normal process?
Thanks, Don. Certainly on two of those, there's conversations that continue to happen, particularly with DND around how the airspace around their aerodromes is managed. That's not solely a Transport Canada responsibility, so it does become a bit more complex there, and we need to continue to consult with our colleagues at DND. So you're right, you did note that it wasn't included in the fee proposal, but you can expect to see more on that in the Canada Gazette Part 1 proposal this fall. Similarly, if we're looking at above 400 feet, that brings in NAV Canada, as you noted, and so there needs to be a level of comfort and an ability to provide the services as well on the part of NAV Canada. So those are both quite complex pieces, and as Alex mentioned, we're still in the process of fleshing out what the regulatory proposal is going to look like and having these conversations. And so you can expect to see additional detail in the fall. But you know, comments are welcome. I did watch your video, so we have seen your comments. So comments are appreciated as we continue to evolve our thinking on this front, and noted on the foreign operators piece as well. That's something we continue to look at. And we will take a bit of a TC team approach to this, so I'll just turn to my colleagues. Did anyone else want to weigh in on any of those parts? I don't see an additional hand. Okay, perfect. If you do want to jump in, please do. And there was also a question in the chat just before we move on to the next question about the slides. Someone wasn't able to see them, so we will be circulating those after the meeting, most likely tomorrow, to everyone who was on our stakeholder distribution list. So you can expect that from us as well. If I know at least one of you wasn't able to see them, and that is the joy of the online meeting. So with that, I will pass it to, I see a hand from Renee. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Renee Burke, Chief Skyview Arts in Niagara-on-the-Lake. I enjoyed this very much, the talk about all the BVLOS. As an advanced operator of drone, the visual line of sight, VLOS, does the BVLOS or the beyond the visual, is that an extra that we need to do? And a lot of the people here in the area that have the operator, advanced operator license, do we need to apply separately for the BVLOS? That's my question to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Renee. Frank, did you want to take that one and speak to the different licensing schemes?
Yeah, thank you, Jeannie. Yeah, the localized BVLOS is what's going to be grandfathered for the existing advanced pilots. There will be some limitations as to what's permitted with the localized BVLOS. In real essence, if you think about it, being able to see the airspace, not going too far from your location, and or staying below an altitude where an airplane may be operating, that's a really good look at or a way to think of the localized BVLOS in a nutshell itself. So for that one, everybody that has an advanced certificate will be grandfathered in and have that privilege associated with their license. There won't be any additional requirements on yourself to complete for the licensing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. I'll pass it. Oh, I saw a hand go up from Dan next, I think. Over to you.
Good afternoon, Dan Julian here, Volatus Aerospace. My question is a follow-up for Frank. Frank, would you be so kind as to specify what the threshold is for localized to everyone here?
I don't see Frank's camera going on, so maybe I'll kick it off. Sorry, Frank, did you want to go?
No, if you want to answer it, by all means.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. So right now, what we've proposed to you in 2020 in the Notice of Proposed Amendment were a couple of scenario-based examples with respect to, you know, flying around a building, flying close to an obstacle where you just lose sight of the drone, but you are still staying within a reasonably safe operation using the follow me function, a few different operational realities like that. And we are still working on what the details of the localized BVLOS proposal will be. But the intent is that there are these very, very low risk, beyond visual line of sight operations that Transport Canada feels can be done safely with an advanced pilot certificate, and that don't necessitate triggering the next level of pilot certification as well as the RPAS operator certificate. So you will see further detail in the Canada Gazette Part 1 proposal that we're expecting by the end of the year. But if you would like to refer to something in the meantime, I'd refer you back to the 2020 NPA, and there was an outline of the idea around the localized BVLOS.
Thanks, Jeannie.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan.
Great.
Back to you, Don.
Okay, sorry, my mute button was slow. Yeah, it's a follow-up on the advanced operators and flying localized BVLOS. So there are additional technical requirements that we're asking the drone manufacturers to comply with. I did not see anywhere what those were, what the technical requirements were. Can anyone elaborate on those? Frankly, I think that the current technical requirements for advanced operations should be sufficient, but maybe there's reasons why you want these other things.
Thanks, Don. Tom, did you want to take that one?
Sure. So that's something that we've worked on a little bit since the NPA. What I can say is that for localized BVLOS, there'll be no additional technical requirements on the drone other than if you're controlled airspace, it needs to be controlled airspace. But the trade-off is with all those localized BVLOS operations, you can't be over or near people.
So the normal, basically the normal restrictions for an advanced operation in whatever airspace you happen to be in. So.
And it's once you go to the full meal deal, low risk BVLOS, if I will call it that, that's where you'd be subject to all those new 922 standards in Appendix A, like reliability and DAA systems and things like that.
Certainly. So yeah, no, that's terrific news. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that question, Don. I see that we don't have any hands up. I'll just give a moment if anyone has any additional questions to raise their hand if they'd like so. Great, we have Steve. Steve, the floor is yours. I believe you're on mute, Steve.
There we go. Steve Bannister with Innovate Drone Services. I see that they're looking at a new certificate for the BVLOS. Why not just make it an endorsement like they do on the traditional aviation side to your licenses for that sort of thing, as opposed to creating a whole new certificate, which then, what you're saying costs more money to do than an endorsement. Is there a reason for that? Not going down the endorsement road?
Thanks, Steve. That sounds like a great question.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Good question. Yeah, from our perspective, we really saw that it really in the long-term perspective, it'll be a let me rephrase this. If from perspective of licensing, it really did have enough differences to the requirements for the license. We really saw that as a start from our advanced certificates, that there was no requirement to attend a course that was driven by an instructor, or that the pilots were guided through the process to get to where they are. So it was a shortcoming that we saw in the advanced certificate. as a result, the requirement for attending a ground school that is instructor-led, be it either virtual or in person, we're not being specific about that for the schools, but we do want to see that there's a little bit more of an ability for the pilot in that low-risk BVLOS new certificate to be able to incorporate all the knowledge that they had from the exams, and how to incorporate that into day-to-day operations. And that's why we took the approach that it was a new certificate, and that it'll look like your old certificate. It'll be the same thing. It's just something that's written on the certificate there. So it'll be the same one document for you all the way across the board that will give you the privileges of all the other licenses below that, right? If that answers your question.
Does. And the other follow-on to that is the mandatory requirement to go to a quote-unquote flight school to get additional training. I haven't seen what that training would be, but what if you have an extensive background in aviation already? Can you challenge the exams without the requirement to go to a flight school, because it just costs you more money? And if you're a very small operation, every dollar you spend costs money. It's $1 less for you.
Yeah, and that's something that we're discussing internally within TC is the ability to use previous experience and knowledge to assess candidates or to give them the privileges. So it is something that's under discussion within the task force, and you'll see more of that at CG1 when the regulations are posted there.
Yeah, okay, because if somebody has an ATPL or a commercial license or was in the military, you would tend to think that they certainly have enough understanding, especially if they've been in the drone business for a couple of years, as to the requirements that would be on an exam, and that they could just challenge it. And if they failed it, well, then maybe they could go to a school. But I think they should have the ability just to challenge the exam.
Yeah, and we'll take that advice. And like I said, if you provide the feedback to the email address, we'll definitely take that under consideration and have more further discussions on it internally within TC.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I see Mark has his hand up. Mark, the floor is yours.
Hi, it's Mark McDonald from Prince Edward Island, flight reviewer. I'm just wondering what implications this has as a flight reviewer, as far as completing flight reviews for somebody that may want to go BVLOS, maybe localized, even more than that. Full meal deal, as you said.
Back over to you, Frank, for a question about flight reviewers.
Yeah, the flight review right now, currently there are two industry working groups that I'm leading. That one is looking at the knowledge requirements for the future pilot certificate. The other group is led by, or is the flight reviewers group that are looking at the requirements for the the new flight review for the new certificate. We're also, that second group is also looking at reviewing the context or the content of the advanced flight review, as to see whether or not we need to add additional measures in there to deal with the requirements or the ability to operate in that localized BVLOS. And our intent is to send both those documents out at the same time as CG1 for consultation as well, to our training providers and to our flight reviewers and to the public at large.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Thanks for your question, Mark. I see that Ali has their hand up. Ali, the floor is yours.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So I'm Ali Ferguson. I'm the regulatory lead for Aurora Aerial, and I thought I'd give Frank a break by asking a question about the Declaration Plus. So in that fee, is that, and the sort of 60-day timeline, is that anticipated to include some iteration with the manufacturer? Like, do we submit our completed application, and then if TC has some clarifying questions, or do we just hear in 60 days that we didn't make it, and if we want to apply again, we have to submit another $1,200?
So this is Tom here. In general, I don't think that would include iteration. I think that it's something that you would want to submit and get feedback from us kind of beforehand. Work with us to make sure your application is submitted, and the math there would be, after we're happy with what you're presenting for a declaration plus.
Is there also going to be a fee then associated with that? Or do we just get to monopolize your time for charge?
No, well, at the moment, the proposal is that the $1,200 is a flat fee. So, hopefully you won't be not monopolizing our time, but that would be the all-up cost.
Never planned to, Tom, but you never know.
I know. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you for your question, Ali. See, Russell has their hand up. Russell, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. So a presenter mentioned something about the operator certificate and having somebody assigned as an accountable executive for anything that happens with the operation, I suppose. Is TC planning on having some sort of a safety management system in place where something like that is enforced, like a safety is enforced? I know 705, you have that SMS here, and I'm just trying to see if in the drone industry we're going to be implementing something similar to that. Hello?
Thanks, Russell. Yeah, sorry, just also having slow mute and video buttons. So what we've proposed is an RPAS operator certificate that was inspired by this traditional aviation air operator certificate. And what we outlined in the notice of proposed amendment was around a few key accountability points, right? So having those individuals in your organization identified as having specific responsibilities when it comes to safety, developing procedures, and those sorts of elements that are often also found in a safety management system. And that's something that, we received a lot of comments on the RPAS operator certificate through the NPA proposal. So those are pieces we're still working through as well, and you'll see a final proposal in the fall from us. But certainly that's the idea, is that with this lower risk beyond visual line of sight framework, it would introduce this RPAS operator certificate that is designed to introduce additional accountability for an organization doing these types of operations.
So how does Transport Canada plan to enforce this?
Much like we enforce the regular aviation regulations and these Part 9 RPAS regulations. So we are working through the implementation and enforcement plans as we speak, as we develop the regulatory proposal going forward. But certainly there will be mechanisms for reporting, for accountability, and for enforcement across the board, not just for the RPAS operator certificate.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your question, Russell. Okay. Dawn, I see that you have your hand up. Dawn, the floor is yours.
Waiting for the mute. Can you hear me now or not? No?
I believe you're on mute, Dawn.
Yeah, it's not coming off.
Do you have access to the chat? You could get.
There we go. Okay, got it. I probably just hit it too many times. Just keep pounding it. Now I forget my question. No, the RPAS operator certificate. Given that there seems to be a fairly intensive process in place,
is
or
now
intended
exiting.
to be in place, and there's an ongoing cost for Transport Canada, why is it a one-time only fee of $250? That seems too low to me, and it should be ongoing. Is there a reason behind that?
I don't know, Tyson, did you want to speak to the fee around the RPAS operator certificate, or did you want me to kick that one off?
I can mention a little bit about the pricing or the costing principles at least. So, because it's a service being provided, we're costing it as a service. So, under the Financial Administration Act, TC can't actually charge more than what it costs to deliver a service. So, even though there might be sort of more value in terms of the right or the privilege associated to having an ROC, we are sort of hamstrung on the amount we can charge when we're looking at it as a service like that. So that's part of the reason. In terms of why it doesn't expire, that kind of stuff, I'd have to turn it back to Jeannie.
Because I get your point about the cost recovery, but it's an ongoing cost because it's an ongoing service from TC.
Well, to issue the certificate at the outset is not an ongoing thing. There may be ongoing costs associated with sort of surveillance and enforcement and that kind of stuff. So those types of costs we don't consider to be recoverable. There has to be a benefit being sort of provided to a client for us to be able to charge. So when we're talking about enforcement actions and things like that, those costs we looked at them, but they're not counted in the sort of the unit cost to actually issue the ROC.
Hi, Don. I can expand a little bit more with regards to the day-to-day or the ongoing operation with the ROC. Looking at things such as a time frame that the ROC is enforced, right, or renewal requirements. Those kinds of things come into play. And as cost recovery, it's just as the gentleman said, it's the initial outlay for the actual certificate or the cost, but then there's no additional cost for things like a renewal or the follow-up to that actual specific document. And I'm talking here in general terms at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Don, for your question. Steve, I see that you have your hand up. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking of Part 7, and the ROCs, in Part 7, they're scalable. The type of operation you have, it depends on some of the requirements that you have to meet. It's and scalable, as mentioned earlier in your briefing. It seems that from a cost perspective, for trying to do anything between, say, low risk and high risk, and the fees associated with the SFOCs in relation to the ROC that you have, it's like one size fits all right now, as opposed to having it scalable both in content and the amount of rigor that would be applied to it. For instance, if you're just a small operator, you may well be the accountable executive, chief pilot, and maintenance guy. And will that be allowed? Compared to some organization that's got 20 people on staff, and they can have dedicated people with terms of reference for each of those jobs. And the ROC can be scaled accordingly. Like, there are some basic aspects I think of it. Even on the risk management system, the safety management system, that too is often scaled. So will this be looked at for the drone business as well?
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, the ROC is scalable, right? It's designed for the organization. If it's a one-person operation, we're not expecting a 400-page manual, right? We're looking for, do you have some kind of processes in place to deal with it? If you're the one that's dedicated to looking after the maintenance, we're good with that. If you're declaring that you're the accountable executive, you're the guy that looks after the maintenance, we're good with that scalability for small operation. Once you get into bigger corporations, that's where you start to see, we got the 50-page manual for the pilots. We have a internal training program that we have for our organization, and our pilots are geared against that, as well as the TC requirements for the certificate. So everything in the ROC is scalable. And even when we go back to the SMS system, right? We're not saying that you have to have an SMS system, right? It doesn't have to look like an airline SMS system. We're looking for things that you have some kind of a safety, quality assurance process within your organization, be it a mom and pop operation with 2 or 3 pilots, or a corporation with 30 or 40 or 50 pilots, right? That you have something in place that deals with, okay, was there an issue? Did something crop up? You know, it could be as simple as a 1-page SMS system, right? Versus a 20 or 30-page manual for a bigger corporation. Again, scalability is what we're looking for. And that's why we've been very good at trying to keep what we use in TC as prescriptive requirements, where we say you must have A, B, C, D, and A, B, C, and D shall look like this. We're trying to make it more about the ability for industry to come up with a solution that's geared towards their business or scalable to their business, where we say we'd like to see some kind of quality assurance program. That's the requirement. You show us that you have a quality assurance program. You show us who's accountable, you know, and we can go from there.
Thanks for your question, Steve. I see Renee has their hand up. Renee, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. As a former military man, I like rules and regulations. That way you can control, you can make sure things are done right. Just to see that how many people are here on this chat, you know, with 40 people before. There was a statistic that just came out with over 4,000 advanced operators. Now, of the 4,000 plus advanced operators that, you know, have done their recertification or their self-study guide, I do not disagree in putting a fee to that, because it puts a little more demand on the people to verify and to follow the rules. In this area here, I've seen many, you know, specialty little drones going around, flying around without following rules and guidelines. So the follow-up or controlling those, you know, $200, $300 Best Buy and Costco drones is going to be a real challenge for Transport Canada. How are you going to control that? That's all I have.
Thanks, Renee. I'm just slow on my button pressing again. You know, I think it's an excellent point. We've seen over the years, this is a rapidly emerging sector. There are people out there, as you note, who are just, you know, picking up a drone from Best Buy the same way they pick up a cell phone, sort of buying it as a piece of technology and taking it out of the box and flying it. And that is a reality that we're acutely aware of. And so we need to tackle this on a couple different fronts. Education is huge, right? In getting an understanding among the wider population that it's not take it out of Best Buy, take it out of the box and throw it up in the air and see what you can do. And so there's the education piece. So there's getting the message out. So Transport Canada carries out safety awareness campaigns every year. And we look to work with our industry partners, and we're happy to see several new associations are springing up and trying to work with us and get those safety messages out, because the more we can work together with the sector to get those messages distributed more widely, the better off we all are. And then the last piece of the puzzle is always going to be enforcement. And so there was a question on that about the future. But for now, with Part 9, as you may be aware, both Transport Canada and our law enforcement partners have the ability to enforce Part 9. So we've signed letters of agreement with, I think we're at 14 law enforcement agencies now, and we work closely with them to provide them with training so that when they're out in the field, they get a complaint, they see something happening, they have additional tools to be able to do something about it. So it continues to be a challenge. I think it's an excellent point, Renee, and it's something we continue to work on. And if anyone on the call wants to work together in continuing our safety awareness efforts, happy to have another conversation on that separately.
Well, I would, if I could just say one more thing here about, you got now 34 very highly qualified people here on the line, and to use some of us as ambassadors, if you want to call it that, for drone flying. I've already tried to do this here in this region here with the students to call them in, and I know a lot of them have these drones, to give them a little bit of an insight, what is really required to fly a drone. Safety standards, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And I think that might even help to make a lot of the kids and teenagers aware of, some of the safety issues that are that confront the Transport Canada with the flight safety, with airports, and especially around this area. We got airport very close by, and I think that might help. We just hope that now COVID gets over with so we can sit together again and do it. So thanks very much.
Here, Renee. And I'm glad you brought up sort of youth education, because I'm encouraged that I see more and more summer camps focused on drones popping up. I think it's really important that we get people, as you note, kind of aware of the technology, aware of what it can do, but aware of how to operate it in a safe way from a very young age. So really happy to see some of those educational opportunities popping up in summer camps, in schools. We've got high school teachers engaged on the subject, universities as well. So it's come a long way in a couple of years since we published the original Part 9 rules, and I'm looking forward to continued improvement on that front. So thanks again for your comments, Renee. Back over to you, Alex.
Thanks. So I'm looking in the meeting, and we currently don't. Oh, we have one last question. I'm just cognizant of time, so I guess I'll pass it over to Reese.
Yeah, just to back on the previous comment there, I'm probably one of the youngest people in this call, as you're saying, and I do know from people typically around my age, they don't really understand that obviously all these rules and regulations. And from what I understand, is that none of them are really aware. And I know you guys are trying to do it, but I haven't really seen, if they're not aware, then, and I'm trying to tell them that, it clearly hasn't been working in that sense, in my opinion. So that's just what I'm noticing, considering that I'm 20 years old and I'm here. So, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment. I think, targeting the younger audiences is something we continue to need to work on, and that's an area where we really need partners, because I'm well aware, that you don't think when you go into Best Buy and buy that drone, I don't know why I'm picking on Best Buy today, but you don't necessarily think Transport Canada, right? And so, we've looked at different avenues. We've, tried to work with some of the stores directly, hit a bit of a road bump, speed bump would be the right term, when it comes to working with the larger retailers directly. But how else can we get that message out? And that's something we just continue to work on and continue to look for new ideas. So appreciate that all of you are out there spreading the good word, and we recognize it as a challenge that we continue to work on going forward. Thanks for your comment.
Great. With that, and seeing as we have no more hands in the chat, I'll pass it over to Jeannie for the closing remarks.
Perfect. Thanks again, Alex. And so my heartfelt thanks to all of you for joining this afternoon. I know all of our time is precious. We wanted to hold these sessions to be able to give you the opportunity to ask the good questions that you've been asking, to be able to inform your written submissions if you haven't already sent them in. And if you have already sent them in, thank you very much. We do read every submission we get, and we take it into account as we move forward with our regulatory development work. And as Alex noted, that's going to continue at an aggressive pace, sort of behind the scenes over the summer and into the fall, taking into account everything we heard on the notice of proposed amendment, taking into account everything we heard on these calls and in our written submissions. And in terms of any immediate next steps, one, as I mentioned, we will share the presentation. Tomorrow. I think it's the end of the week tomorrow. And the second piece you'll see from us is a summary report of all of the comments, obviously anonymized and grouped up into themes. And you'll see that report back out from us in the coming weeks once the consultation process has closed, so that you can get a sense of the comments that were made across the board from our various stakeholders. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your engagement on this. As we were just talking about, it is essential for us to continue to be engaged and continue to have these conversations. And I look forward to hearing from all of you and to working with all of you in the future. So take care and stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.